There. Let's talk about divine unsurpassability, especially the kind of unsurpassability that occurs in Plotinus. I'm Eric Steinhardt, and you can learn more about me at ericsteinhardt.com. We'll start with the Stoic great chain of being, particularly in Cicero. He was a Roman politician and Stoic philosopher. He said there were several levels to the Stoic great chain of being. Start with rocks, then plants, then non-human animals, humans, gods, and then cosmic Zeus. He describes these in his book, The Nature of the Gods. And we can use the Stoic great chain of being to define a series of increasingly complex universes. Let's say the complexity of a universe is the complexity of its most complex thing. If rocks are at level 1 on the Stoic great chain of being, then a universe that has only rocks would be a level 1 universe. So here we can see some universes going from simple to complex, a series of universes that goes from earlier to later. We don't have to think of earlier and later as being in time. We can say the number 2 is earlier than the number 3. So this is just an ordered sequence, a mathematically ordered sequence of universes. At the bottom, universe alpha has nothing. It's a level 0 universe. Then we have a level 1 universe with rocks, a level 2 universe with rocks and plants, a level 3 with rocks, plants, and animals, and so on. These are all just finitely complex universes. The complexity of the most complex thing in each of these universes is finitely complex, so the series goes up like the natural numbers, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Can we go from the finite to the infinite? Can we pass from finite complexity to infinite complexity? Universes that contain infinitely complex things at level omega, where omega is the formal mathematical symbol for the smallest infinity, countable infinity. How could we do this? To talk about this, let's turn to Charles Sanders Peirce, an American philosopher, lived 1839 to 1914. He was probably the greatest American philosopher so far. And he has a quote that can help us out, and it goes like this. In the beginning, infinitely remote, there was a chaos of unpersonalized feeling. This feeling, sporting here and there in pure arbitrariness, would have started the germ of a generalizing tendency. Its other sportings would be evanescence, but this would have a growing virtue. The tendency to habit would be started, and from this, with the other principles of evolution, all the regularities of the universe would be evolved. At any time, however, an element of pure chance survives and will remain until the world becomes an absolutely perfect, rational, and symmetrical system in which mind is at last crystallized in the infinitely distant future. We start from an alpha point, chaos of unpersonalized feeling, and end up at an omega point, an infinite mind, a pure mind in the infinite future. So there it is. There's a chart of Peirce's omega point. Complexity is growing in exponential fashion from the alpha of nothingness to the omega of infinity. And the omega point is a pure mind. It's an infinite mind at the end of time. We see something like this curve in Moore's law, right, which has been talked about with computers. I mean, computers can have artificial intelligence, so something like Moore's law would be a curve of increasing mentality within the universe. And Ray Kurzweil picks up this idea. He's an American inventor, born in 1948, still alive. He argues that evolution makes progress through increasing degrees of complexity, and his series of degrees of complexity is much like the Stoic great chain of being. He says there are 6 phases of cosmic evolution. We start with physics and chemistry, sort of like Stoic rocks. We get to biology and DNA, plants and animals. Then we get to human brains. Then we get to technology, which is, on Kurzweil's view, beginning to enter into the godlike portion of the Stoic great chain of being. Finally, human brains will merge with these godlike technologies after the singularity, and the universe will wake up and become something very much like the Stoic cosmic Zeus. Kurzweil talks about this kind of exponential growth of artificial intelligence. You see that exponential growth curve, sort of like Charles Sanders Peirce's curve, or sort of like the curve to the omega point. And AI passing from one insect brain, one mouse brain, one human brain, through all human brains. And if that curve continues to grow exponentially, it would pass through the level of being able to simulate or AIs that are more powerful than all the intelligent life in the Milky Way put together, or perhaps even the entire universe. Kurzweil says that evolution moves towards greater complexity, greater elegance, greater knowledge, greater intelligence, greater beauty, creativity, and greater levels of subtle attributes such as love. In every monotheistic tradition, God is likewise described as all these qualities, only without any limitation. Infinite knowledge, infinite intelligence, infinite beauty, infinite creativity, infinite love, and so on. Of course, even the accelerating growth of evolution never achieves an infinite level. But as it explodes exponentially, it certainly moves rapidly in that direction. So evolution moves inexorably towards this conception of God, although never quite reaching this ideal. So Kurzweil says intelligence is expanding into the universe. The universe is waking up. Eventually it will wake up and it'll transcend itself. There'll be a self-surpassing universe which grows and grows and grows and grows in all these positive qualities, but it still always remains finite. Even though it's growing towards the infinity, it doesn't quite get there. So Kurzweil is in the right direction here, but how can we get to an actually infinite omega point in the universe? For this, let's turn to Frank Tipler, an American physicist still living. He picks up on the old Stoic notion of the great chain of being too, and he says, quote, "Our species is an intermediate step in the infinitely long temporal chain of being that comprises the whole of life and space-time. An essential step, but still only a step. If the ascent of life into the omega point is to occur, one day the most advanced minds must be non-Homo sapiens. The heirs of our civilization must be yet another species, and their heirs yet another. Ad infinitum, into the omega point." What is this omega point? Tipler's omega point is an infinite computer, an infinitely powerful computer. The omega point in its transcendence is in its essence a self-programming universal Turing machine with a literal infinity of memory. And the omega point has infinite speed in the sense that it can always perform its next operation twice as fast as its last operation. It can accelerate through all finite speeds. Now, an infinite computer like Tipler's omega point can simulate all finite structures in any finite unit of time. So his omega point can simulate the entire history of the Milky Way, including all its life and all its minds, at the atomic or subatomic level of detail in 1 second, or 1 millisecond, or even less. This leads, of course, to the simulation hypothesis of Nick Bostrom. Maybe we're living inside one of these omega points. But for our purposes, the interesting thing is that the omega point, if it does appear at the end of time in our universe, is an actually infinite machine. It is an infinite mind. And so, if there is a universe that contains such an omega point, it would be a universe at the infinite level of complexity. Its most complex thing would be an infinite omega point. It doesn't seem likely that our universe actually is going to converge to an infinite omega point at the end of time, but perhaps our universe will be followed in the series of more complex universes by an even more complex universe which gets closer, and another universe which gets closer and closer and closer, and there can be an infinite series of ever more complex universes which converges in its limit to a universe that contains something like Tipler's infinite omega point. Well, beyond every infinity, there's a bigger infinity. Every number is surpassable, so beyond every infinity, there's a greater infinity. And Tipler's infinity is just a countable infinity. It's the infinity of the counting numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. There are infinitely many of those, but the countable infinities are surpassable. Beyond the countable infinities, there exist the uncountable infinities, and there are computers with uncountably infinite powers. So beyond the countably infinite universes, if we continue to extend our series of ever more complex universes, there are going to be uncountably infinitely complex universes which contain uncountably infinitely complex machines. They're signified by Aleph-1, right, the first uncountably infinite cardinal. Well, every number is surpassable, and beyond every infinity there are greater infinities, so the uncountable infinities are surpassable, and beyond the uncountable infinities there exist the large cardinals. Here's the Wikipedia page, a snippet from that on large cardinals, right? And you can see there Aleph naught and Aleph 1 down at the bottom are the small infinities, but beyond them there are going to be the large infinities. Here's a long list of the large cardinals, right? It's long and we don't have to worry about all those mathematical details. Again, that's taken from the Wikipedia page on large cardinals. But we can posit a series of cosmic minds now using the large cardinals, right? But these minds are complex things, and we're going to measure them by the complexity of their most complex thoughts. Realize that a single thought in an uncountably infinite mind could be an entire countably infinite universe. Right? The thoughts in these minds can be entire universes in all their complete detail. So we start with finitely complex minds, like ours. We proceed to uncountably infinite complex minds, like Tipler's omega point, right? A universe that is actually an uncountably infinite mind. Then we proceed, the series of universes, the series of cosmic minds, right, becomes uncountably infinite. Then inaccessibly infinite minds, ineffably infinite minds, measurably infinite minds, super compact minds. These are all cosmic minds, right? These are all super omega points which appear in the series of universes, because after Tipler, the series of universes turns into a series of cosmic minds. These are all surpassable cosmic minds, right? Every single one of them can be surpassable. So let's talk about surpassability. And unsurpassability. Beyond every series of surpassable objects, there exists an unsurpassable object. This is something that modern mathematics and logic tells us. So beyond any series of surpassable objects of some type, there exists an unsurpassable object which surpasses that type. Look at numbers. Every number is surpassable, and beyond the series of surpassable numbers, there's going to exist an unsurpassable what? An object, but if it were a number, then it would be in the series of surpassable numbers, but then it would not be unsurpassable. So, the unsurpassable series of surpassable numbers is absolute infinity. It's not a number. It transcends numberness. It's like numberness extended beyond itself. Same with sets. Every set is surpassable, for instance, by its power set. Beyond the series of surpassable sets, there exists an unsurpassable what? If it were a set, then it would be in the series of surpassable sets. It would have a power set, but then it would not be unsurpassable. So the unsurpassable series of surpassable sets is what? It's going to be the proper class of all sets. Of course, we have to take the union, but that's a technical detail. The proper class of all sets is not a set. It's a kind of collection that transcends setness. It's a way that setness extends beyond itself into some kind of ideality or transcendence. Unsurpassability in general, how do we talk about it? An unsurpassable series of surpassable objects of some type F. Let's call it the star of F's, in the sense that stars seem to be out of reach, inaccessible up in the heavens. The unsurpassable series of surpassable numbers is the star of numbers, and the unsurpassable series of surpassable sets is the star of sets. A star of F's, whether F is numbers or sets or anything else, transcends Fness. It's not an F, but expresses a way that Fness goes beyond itself. Think now about the unsurpassability of minds. Every cosmic mind is surpassable, and beyond any series of surpassable cosmic minds, there exists an unsurpassable what? It can't be a mind, for if it were a mind, then it would be in the series of surpassable minds, but then it would not be unsurpassable. So any unsurpassable series of surpassable minds is a star of minds. It transcends mentality. It goes beyond mentality. It's a way that mentality surpasses itself or exceeds itself. How do we understand this? Let's turn to Charles Hartshorne. He was an American philosopher and theologian. He developed what he called process theology. He was born in 1897, died in 2000. He lived to be 103 years old. And he wrote about birds. He was an amazing character, an amazing guy. He wrote a book called Anselm's Discovery. And in that book, he said God is, quote, the self-surpassing surpasser of all. This gives us a clue in talking about unsurpassability. Every surpassable series of surpassable cosmic minds is a self-surpassing surpasser of all the cosmic minds in its series. It's a star of minds. Now, Hartshorne uses theological language, talks about God. We don't need to do that, but we can say that a star of minds is divine. Right? It's an unsurpassable series of surpassable cosmic minds. It's going to be a kind of self-surpassing surpasser of all, similar to Hartshorne's God, so it's reasonable to call it divine. Every star of minds is divine. It's a divine mind. Hartshorne thought there was only one divine mind, only one God, but why think that? Why not say there are many divine minds? Any divine mind is going to look like something like this. We'll have surpassable cosmic minds, that whole series of increasingly complex minds with their increasingly complex internal structures, rising from finite through all the large cardinals up in super compact. And then beyond that whole series, there will be something like a star of minds, a true omega point. It will be something that transcends mentality in a divine way, and it's plausible to call that a divine mind. It isn't really a mind, but the adjective divine, like the adjective ideal, modifies its noun in such a way to indicate that the noun goes beyond itself. Right? So a divine mind is kind of like a glass eye. It's not really an eye. A glass eye, of course, can't see, but a divine eye would see even more than any surpassable eye could see. And likewise, a divine mind transcends all mentality. So, if we develop a Platonian cosmology in its full form, we get the idea that there are many of these divine minds. There are many stars of minds. There, you see the world tree expanding outwards into the stars. Many divine minds, many stars. Each of these divine minds is a self-surpassing surpasser of all. Each of them is a star of minds. Each one of them is an unsurpassable series of surpassable minds. Thank you very much for listening. I'm Eric Steinhardt. You can learn more about me at ericsteinhardt.com.